Hello, I'm Anya, a nutrition focused professional chef and founder of Julienne, empowering women to use food as fuel for healing, happiness, and health. Today, we are talking to Mandy Murphy Carroll, a registered dietitian and master in public health nutrition from UC Berkeley, who has worked as a health educator and researcher at WIC, Stanford University, UCSF, and Project Open Hand to learn more about how she believes postpartum is an exciting time period that can bring a lot of healing and benefits to a woman. She uses nutrition in her life and to help women develop positive habits to promote wellness for their postpartum journey. Hi, Mandy. I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Anya.
You got it. So you have a fascinating story, and I'm thrilled to dive in here. There's so much to tell. To start off, how did you get into the career of nutrition and holistic health?
That is a great question. I think from an early age, my family, we were fortunate to always prioritize eating dinner together, even if that meant getting to the table at 9 p.m. with all the busy obligations. And that was also a touch point for my family to invite community members, family, friends, neighbors over. So mealtime was always a really big deal. And I realized that beyond food, it was an important point of connection with our community. So that's really what drove me to study nutrition. I was kind of up in the air about what I wanted to pursue in high school. And my mom made me write a list of 10 things I enjoyed, and a lot of them were around cooking, eating. So I decided to pursue nutrition. And I've just always been on a journey of healing and holistic health and seeing the importance of nutrition in our health, but also all the other aspects that drive health. And I think friends and family often come to me with various health problems, and I try to help tackle them. But I've always, yeah, from an early age, loved food, eating, what the transformative impact it has on our health, and mostly being community. Something around chatting together at the table is really meaningful.
I couldn't agree more. You know what? I feel like you just told a lot of my story, except for at that moment when I wrote, food eating on my list.
Yes.
It was like, okay, I'm going to go study political economy of food and then become a chef. And now I'm like, oh, if only I had also gone the nutrition route at that time. So I feel like you and I were very similar and went different routes, but we're meant to come back together.
I love that. And I will just share a quick, in my dorm, I brought knives and olive oil and I stored them under my bed, and we had a communal kitchen. And I started a group of friends. Anyone was welcome, but we called it the Sunday Night Dinner Club. And we would always come together and eat every Sunday night. And friends would pitch in $5. And then a farmer's market started on campus. And this farmer was really generous and would always donate us food. So we'd incorporate those into our meals. And this was in Tucson, Arizona, where there's not a lot of agriculture given the season and the climate. But so it was a really rich memory. We were able to keep that up the entire time of college. So I think a lot of us point to that as having strong friendships, around eating. And that's something I've really tried to maintain, a big focal point of social connection for me to this day is still cooking and eating together.
Amen, sister. It's the best way to bring people together. And boy, do I wish I had been in your college dorm with you because that sounds like so much fun.
We had so much fun.
Although I can't imagine you were using all those knives in your college dorm that you had stored under
I
your bed.
know. I don't know if that'd be allowed now, but it was then.
That's true. You have to sneak them in.
Yes.
Well, it makes sense you come back around to offering more cooking today, which we'll get into more later. But it makes a lot of sense. So, with that, you were in this world, obviously, when you were younger of studying nutrition and loving cooking and loving the community and, just what comes with food. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about your journey after college and just your personal journey with nutrition and how that's affected you?
Absolutely. right after college, or shortly after college, applied and was accepted to a dietetic internship in Puerto Rico with the Department of Health, or Departamento de Salud. And that was a year-long internship. It was community focused. So I was in different community-based hospitals, community programs, WIC, and was exposed to a lot of different aspects of public health nutrition, school programs, and really, really loved that line of work. And when I finished that internship, it was kind of the turn of the economy, 2009. It was difficult to find a job. So I was just applying to jobs all over the country. I ended up in San Francisco and just started knocking on doors, all different kinds of places. But I ended up very serendipitously at the County of Marin in their WIC and prenatal programs. And I had this really sweet dual role. So at the time, the County of Marin owned and operated the prenatal clinic, and I would work there a few days a week, and then at the WIC, which is in the same wellness campus, a few days a week. And most of our patients at the prenatal clinic were recently immigrated from Central America. So they received emergency Medi-Cal for the duration of their pregnancy and then 6 weeks postpartum. And I only saw the high risk women, who mostly it was for gestational diabetes. And I was new and young at that time, and I was really passionate about trying to reframe this as a diet, because that word was used a lot, dieta, diet, instead to become a lifestyle. And not just the woman to change her habits, but if there were older children, if there was a partner, for the whole family to work on small habit changes. Because someone who has gestational diabetes, if they don't change their habits, there's a much greater chance they'll develop type 2 diabetes within 5 years postpartum. And the unfortunate thing with emergency Medi-Cal, women are dropped after 6 weeks. But the wonderful thing was I was working at WIC, and many of them were clients at WIC. So I was able to continue the care postpartum for a year or two, or however long they wanted, through their child. And I just thought to myself, what a shame, what a lost opportunity. We have this high touch point during pregnancy. We're seeing them every week or two. We're seeing these tremendous changes. And then they have the baby, and we kind of say, okay, good luck, when that, in fact, is a much more challenging time to maintain healthy habits. So I went to my boss at WIC and I asked if we could start a postpartum wellness program. And she was very supportive. And I launched with a coworker a 10-week postpartum program called Un Comienzo Nuevo, or a new beginning. And it was 3 facets of wellness: movement, activity, mental health, stress, kind of that aspect, and nourishment. And we also touched on lactation, if that was something the moms were doing. But we had so much fun. We built community. We did cooking classes. We had a very comprehensive approach. And I was able to run this with 2 cohorts of women. And then at the, I really was very inspired by the results and just the lack of what I saw as prenatal care in our country. So I decided to go back to graduate school to pursue my master's in public health nutrition. And I had this grand vision to scale this program and how we could do this. And I had this project lined up, but then they were getting audited. So I kind of had to switch gears, and I ended up getting a job in research. And that's just been my line of work ever since graduate school the last 10 years. So I've mostly been working in different research projects. But my roots, I really still believe, perinatal period is really what lights my fire, everything from preconception to postpartum. And I find it such a missed opportunity in our country for, and just, I think a lot of our country is focused on dollars, and I think it's just such a missed opportunity, especially from a financial perspective. If we're able to help bolster a family's wellness in the first few years postpartum, we can stave off disease for a lifetime. And we'll get into that more.
We will. It's so beautiful, though, that you did go into research, because while it sounds like that program would have made a massive difference, and you already made a massive difference, but what you brought up here is just that there's so much research and science that has yet to be done on women in general, but especially the perinatal period. Like, I'm digging all day, every day on whatever I can find from modern science that we've already discovered. And it's minuscule. There's just
Mhm.
so much that needs to be proven out and needs to be tested and shown. So it's fantastic that we have people like you that are dedicating their time and energy to this research. So I'm glad you went that route. Very
Yeah,
grateful.
no, it's been a fun journey.
It's incredible. So your personal story too, this is already so interesting, but if I recall, you also are a mom, correct? You went
Yes.
you went through your own perinatal journey. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yes. So I think I was, as I said, already well rooted in the idea of wellness and holistic health pre-conception through the postpartum period. I went on to during my research years. I now have two children, a 7-year old and a 3.5-year old, and I really was very fortunate to utilize my learnings there. But yes, I had some very interesting experiences. I think. And I can talk about one, how I kind of healed myself through a diagnosis in my first pregnancy. Um, and then I can talk about my postpartum experience and what I did to prepare myself. Does that sound
I think that sounds great.
okay?
Yes, fascinating.
So, some interesting things. First, to start off, in my first pregnancy, I did not want to take a prenatal vitamin. There's not a lot of great research about just the general multivitamin. And so I decided not to. And my care provider was not supportive of that. So I ended up changing care providers at my medical practice. And so that's just an interesting thing. I think I have a lot of mixed feelings about supplements and vitamins in general, but I
Can we
only
go
take,
into that for a second?
yeah,
I would love to know more because this is something that every woman goes through when they are getting pregnant, right? Is what
right.
supplements to take.
Yeah,
What has created this
this
theory? Yeah.
was really informed by one lecture I listened to in graduate school. This really um, prominent researcher around folic acid came in and lectured us in public health. In public health nutrition, we're always thinking about different major nutrition milestones and what's the word I'm looking for? Um, Major ways we've implemented nutrition in a powerful way. So like fluoride, fluoridation of water, which now we know there's a lot of mixed things about. But another one we really hung our hats up on was we're going to we've made this connection that a deficiency in folate causes certain neural tube defects, spina bifida. So we're going to put folic acid in all of our breads, cereals, and when this researcher came in and really dug into the research, you realize it really wasn't a public health win. We didn't actually see a decrease in spina bifida and neural tube defects as prominently as we initially thought. And part of the problem is folic acid is a synthetic version of folate, and not all women can process folic acid and turn it into folate. That's one major thing. Another is that that's not probably the only important B vitamin. It's the whole suite. Like choline is also really important. And I just think it's a little naive to think we can substitute synthetic versions for versions of the vitamins and minerals that we find in a whole food. So first of all, we take one thing out and make it's a synthetic version, but it's also just not naturally existing and coexisting with all the things we might find in an egg, or in fish or in an orange. It's much different taking a vitamin C supplement than eating a fresh orange. Um, and then just prenatals in general, they only have a fraction of what we need in terms of all the different vitamins and minerals. It's not the whole picture. And I think sometimes it gives folks a false sense of safety. Like, okay, I took my prenatal, I'm good, I'm just going to eat whatever. And I think that's really short sighted. It's not a replacement. And they're expensive. And I'd rather, if someone's on the margin of food, pour that into getting more high quality eggs for the week or something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
and that seems to be an interesting one, is that it seems like the vitamin in general was created to essentially help people who weren't getting enough of something
right.
naturally, right? To help them supplement it. But so it's an interesting catch 22 of like
It
we think
is.
that that's all we need, and it was created to help someone who isn't getting enough, but essentially it's because you're not getting enough and
Right.
you should be doing it naturally so that you can actually absorb it, right?
Exactly. And the reason that folic acid was chosen instead of folate, it's got a longer shelf life and
Mm.
it's stable and it's cheaper to produce. So, but now we know, have you dove into the MTFHR gene or
Tell us
MTHF?
about it.
Okay, that's a gene that it's estimated most women have some kind of a mutation, but that's the gene that doesn't allow a lot of people to process folic acid and convert it into the potent folate that will actually prevent these diseases. So it's estimated anywhere between 25 and 40% have the one that's really problematic, but most of us have some kind of gene mutation.
So essentially our genes are mutating
Intact.
to reject that folic acid that's in our cereals and our bread and added in not naturally.
Exactly.
Hmm, fascinating. And
Yeah.
that's also in our prenatal. What about for that prenatal vitamin though? What about all the other stuff that's in there?
Yeah. So prenatal vitamin. One of the classes I teach is about postpartum nutrition, and I kind of go through a list of core nutrients that we need, and then where we find these in food. And I like to put on the board a list of all the nutrients I've just covered, and then have folks guess which ones are in a typical prenatal. And I use a widespread Nature Made from Costco, and it's only a fraction. We don't get any energy, we don't get protein, we don't get choline. Most don't have choline. Most
Hmm.
don't have glycine. Usually no fiber or prebiotics. You might have a separate probiotic, but most probiotics are not in most prenatal vitamins. Um, and water, to be extreme. But and then we really don't know the exact amounts, and sometimes maybe you're getting too much in your prenatal vitamin or too little. So I really think it is kind of sold as an insurance policy, and I don't think it should be. I think we need to figure out how to support people to eat more, mostly whole real foods.
And
Um,
so from your research, if you're reading a well-rounded diet of whole, I hate the word diet, a well-rounded,
Eating
food
pattern.
supply of whole real foods, then you shouldn't need that.
Absolutely. I mean, and not to say that's easy to do, because when we look at the research, most Americans aren't reaching the recommendations, but it is possible. And I like to try to teach to that how to make that possible. But
Beautiful.
yeah, just to recap, so prenatal vitamins are missing critical nutrients. They have the synthetic versions of nutrients, and it's very different consuming these vitamins and minerals extracted versus eating them naturally in their existing synergy of nutrients that naturally occurs within whole foods. And again, it may oversupply some nutrients.
Wow. And so when you were going through being pregnant, or starting to get pregnant, and you decided not to take those, um, how did that affect you? How was your pregnancy?
Fortunately, I gave birth to two healthy children, and they're still healthy and thriving. But I would say for me, I did feel a little guilty and awkward, even though it's just such a new thing in human history to even have the chance to have, to take prenatal vitamins. But it did kind of always make me feel guilty in some way. But fast forward, I had a very smooth pregnancy with my first. No morning sickness. I felt well throughout. The very end, at 36 weeks, doctors in the US test for a bacteria called Group B strep or GBS.
Hmm.
Have you heard of that?
I have, but
Okay.
explain a little more. Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of blindsided. I didn't know this was standard of care. So they test vaginally and anally for this group B strep. Again, this is very, very common, just kind of like that gene mutation I mentioned, but 25, at least 25% of women are positive for GBS at any given moment. And interestingly, in Great Britain, in the National Healthcare Service (NHS), is that what the acronym NHS? They do not test. So we have a very different approach in the United States. So lo and behold, I tested positive. I was really shocked, but I just tried to consume all the information, all the research I could, because the standard treatment of care is when you check into the hospital, you need to have 4 hours of antibiotic drip, penicillin,
Hmm.
every 4 hours during your labor. So, A, I didn't want to be hooked up to anything. And B, I've been in microbiome research and I just don't know about the risks of getting intravenous antibiotics during labor and what that does to our offspring. And there wasn't a lot of good research. This was 7.5 years ago at this point.
Wow.
So I did everything I can. I kind of leaned into nutrition and holistic healing, and I made myself a protocol, a very intense protocol for 2 weeks. So it included orally garlic, chopped garlic. I would chop garlic, 4 cloves, let it sit for 10 minutes, and that breaks the cellular walls and makes allicinin an active substance in garlic that's a very powerful antibiotic, antiviral, and antifungal. Garlic vaginally, apple cider vinegar. I really upped my probiotics, and I went to acupuncture twice. And I went in 2 weeks later at my 38-week visit, and I basically had to be, I asked if I could be retested, and my doctor denied that. And I had to go on to ask 3 times. I was almost in tears. And she said, well, what would a negative result? What would a positive result? Would you do the antibiotics? And I just said, please test me. And I was negative. But when I showed up to labor 2 weeks later, I went into labor right around 40 weeks. They wrote GBS positive on my whiteboard, and they
Huh.
treated me as if I were GBS positive. And it was very stressful. 3 different OBs approached my husband and me, made me sign a consent. Finally, one of us gave us a consent form to decline the antibiotics. But I told them we haven't taken this decision lightly. We've read all the research. We understand the risks. And I am GBS negative right now. And I don't think we know the implications of such widespread antibiotic use at the point of labor. And one physician he did tell my husband there was a world before treating GBS with antibiotics and a world after, and you don't want to see that world before. They were really leaning into scare tactics. And I really think that slowed my labor down. But
Terrifying.
yeah, I was fine. It's completely asymptomatic, so you don't know you have it. And my son was fine. So I that's something. It's a really interesting. We use antibiotics for so many things in labor. We've had this widespread um, increase in different childhood diseases, and you just wonder. It's such a new thing in human history again, but we use antibiotics if someone's waters are broken for more than 24 hours, if they come to labor with a fever, if they have a cesarean birth. 1 in 4 women who are GBS positive. So, and then we're seeing all these rise in certain childhood diseases that have a link to the microbiome.
So something I'm going to interrupt you for a second here. What's so interesting, Mandy, is to really think back, right? Like antibiotics were created to help in situations that were
Right.
really dire, right? And
Right.
where we didn't know how else to handle it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there are times when they're very helpful for someone like you who's really confident in the research and that is discovering this research, which not many people have their hands on this kind of information, and someone like you who knows what to do with nutrition instead. um that's that sounds like magic. It sounds wild to think that you were able, also just to be able to eat that much garlic. It's pretty
Yes. Yes.
um, so, for for someone who doesn't have that same knowledge as you, going into, being pregnant and all the recommendations they're getting, um, how would you recommend they approach thinking about these things? The perinatal vitamin, the antibiotics that they're recommended to take, especially in labor when you're, barely
Right.
able to think, let alone be making those decisions. How would you recommend someone approach that differently, so that they feel a little more confident in those situations about their choices?
Yeah, it's so tough because our medical system is really set up this way and for us not to question things. And I feel like there's such a focus, especially in OB care, on fear and the worst case scenario. It's interesting. Pediatrics kind of switches. They kind of mitigate all fear, and it's a very different field of practice. But my personal experience is very anecdotal, but I feel like a lot of OBs, they've seen the worst case scenario, and I have a lot of compassion for them. And I think their main goal is baby that's alive, mom that's alive, we've done our job. And so they try to do everything in their power to mitigate loss, death. And again, I have a lot of compassion for them. They do see the worst of the worst. But it's just interesting when you read the NHS website, it says like there's a very small chance this can happen and turn into, because the risk of GBS is very serious. But sometimes it's not always linked with the mom having a GBS positive test, and that's why they've stopped testing for it. But it can lead to meningitis in the infant and even death. So very, very serious. But just the language they talk about is very differently. So one is question, look for your own information, but just ask questions and know that you don't always have to go with the routine recommendation for care. And usually in OB care, there's a big checklist to get through, and not a lot of it is on wellness. I was never asked, how are you moving your body? How is your sleep? How is your mental health beyond taking a standardized DHQ-9 scale questionnaire for depression? What are you eating? That was never a focus. So that's just, I don't think that's something in a 15-minute appointment or 30-minute appointment, at best, that most providers are going to be able to provide. So yeah, seek information out where a doula can help you navigate a lot of those things, especially care decisions during birth and postpartum. Yeah, look to holistic resources, and I can touch on some of my favorite in the end resources that I go to. But yeah, just question. Know that, and it's okay if you go with this standard recommendation as well. But just know that you do have more opportunities to question that I think we are offered.
And a big part of this, and that's beautiful, by the way, a big part of this is education, right? And being able
Yeah,
to navigate the noise of all the
right,
information we're getting online now, and, be able to verify that you're getting information that's helpful, which is why, at Julienne, we're doing what we're doing. We're trying to educate during this journey and give you
right,
verified information that you don't have to seek it out, right? You can find it
right.
right away. But it's
Absolutely.
yeah, it's tough time going through all those decisions. So,
Yeah, and a lot aren't even on your radar, and then they're kind of presented to you in the moment. You're just like, okay. So trying to, yeah, inform yourself ahead of time, especially when birth comes, to know what you can say yes to, what you want to say yes to, what you want to say no to, what you want to question. But and I'll just share a quick. After the birth of my firstborn, I was really inspired about just the experience of birth and how that can be so transformative and healing. Just quickly, my own mother she had to have a cesarean birth with my sister and me, and my mother-in-law as well had to have a cesarean birth with her three sons, my husband and his two brothers. And my grandmothers were giving birth in the twilight era. So they were not conscious. They were knocked out. So I didn't really have any positive birth stories in my family. And I really wanted to have a vaginal birth. And I was able to have that with my firstborn, and it felt so transformative and healing. Like I was reclaiming birth for my generations of family. And that sounds maybe overly dramatic, but it's really, I felt so much power after giving birth. And I really got inspired. So I decided to go through training to become a birth doula. And when my son was 2 years old, actually classes started on his second birthday. And we learned an acronym there called BRAIN, which is a really powerful tool to help you navigate pregnancy, postpartum, and life decisions in general. But it starts with B is analyzing the benefits, R, the risks, naming the risks, A, what are the alternatives, I, what does your intuition say, and N, do you need to make a decision now, never, kind of what's the time frame. So instead of just doing a pros and cons, it's a little bit more comprehensive. And it can be used on something simple, like it's 3 p.m., I'm tired, should I get a mocha? Well, the benefits, I'll get a little jolt of energy, I'll feel good, it'll taste good. Risks, well, then it might impact my sleep at night, I might get a sugar low, a crash. What are the alternatives? Could I walk around the block a few times? Could I do jumping jacks? Could I take a nap? Something else to wake me up? What does my intuition say? Probably not. When do I need to make a decision? Maybe within the next 30 minutes. Okay, first I'm going to take a walk around the block and see how my energy feels after that. But that can really be a great tool to help you navigate decisions when your healthcare provider presents you with the decision to be made throughout your perinatal journey.
I love that. Brain. I'm going to
Yes,
keep that.
use your brain, they say. So, and that's something most doulas will be trained in to lean on.
It's beautiful. It's very, very beautiful. And so important that we keep it with us when we have some insanely big decisions to make and
Yes,
little day-to-day
yes,
decisions, everyday decisions like the mocha. That's
right,
a big decision because
right,
that can affect your next 24 hours, whether you like it or not. Um,
yes,
but maybe it's worth it for that little Joel's boost of happiness,
right,
that you get from
exactly.
it. So follow your intuition. And so through all of this, I do know that you carried those knives to college and brought that olive oil
Right.
and you like to cook. How did that affect your pregnancy and postpartum?
Yeah, so I definitely was able to nourish myself and kind of forego those prenatal vitamins and not have too many qualms about it, even though I did still remain feeling guilty. But more importantly, a friend of mine, when I was in graduate school, had a brilliant idea to cook for herself postpartum. And she cooked for herself while she was pregnant to prepare for the postpartum period. And she hosted 3 or 4 cooking parties, and I went to one of them, and she asked friends to donate money and time, and I did that. And I just thought, what a brilliant idea. We kind of lost touch, but when it came when I was pregnant myself, I said, I'm definitely going to do that. So about 37 weeks pregnant, I invited a number of friends, my in-laws, to help me cook 3 large nourishing dishes to help me. And we had a chest freezer. I still do. But I prepared an African peanut stew, a really anti-inflammatory, vegetable-rich, with turmeric, curry powder, ginger, garlic, and with chicken bone broth. And then I prepared a big chili with a bunch of different kinds of tough cuts of meat, which are rich in glycine, which I mentioned prenatal vitamins don't have, that can help with tissue repair, gut health,
In
and
the beans and chili?
beans, meat, bone broth, and a bunch of vegetables and real chilies, a variety of real chilies, ground and roasted.
Mm.
Um, and then I made meatballs, but with ground beef, shredded beets, onions, carrots, number of spices, eggs, and ground liver, and blended liver. So those were my postpartum dishes, and it was a lifesaver. And I really think that was, again, very transformative in my own healing process. My husband only had 2 weeks off of work, and he was working quite a long distance from our home. So he was gone 12 hours a day. And I really would have probably been reaching for bananas, peanut butter, nothing wrong with those, but it wouldn't have been the full spectrum of nourishment that I needed. Um, so we noted how much that helped us, did that again for my second born. And then I did it for my sister and a family friend. And I realized this is such a needed thing. So when work was kind of changing for me last fall, I decided to launch my own business part time with cooking parties for the postpartum period.
Wow.
Um, so
Brilliant, because I was just going to say, how do we know what to cook and how do we take the time? And also, can we get a helping hand at this point? Let's be honest, it's hard to do that on your own. So
yes,
look at you.
yeah. So that is really transformative, and there are so many other services out there like Meal Train, but it's nice to know you can choose the ingredients that go into your food and it's right there. Sometimes you don't really feel like interacting with other people every day, so it's great to just have that frozen ready. And again, nourishing, it's not just the mother but the whole family needs nourishment postpartum. Everyone's going through psychological wellness changes, so everyone needs a base of good nourishment.
Beautiful. I love that so much. Great inspiration to really get prepared for what's ahead because once you have that baby, like you said, you reached for whatever you can get, right? You'll eat
Yes,
whatever's in front of you.
yes,
And it is a really good moment for you to heal, correct? Like the
yes.
healing after. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What happens during postpartum for a woman and their health?
Absolutely. I'm going to lean back on this class I teach again for postpartum nutrition, but I've really kind of named 4 pillars of healing postpartum, and they're all equal. And I don't think you could take one away. They all interface with each other, but those are nourishment, sleep, and rest. Obviously, sleep is hard to come by, but resting, leaning into rest as much as possible, stress management, and support, community support. And why I say those are all interconnected, we can't take away the pillar of sleep and expect someone to be well nourished. When we're not getting enough rest and sleep, it impacts all of our hormones. Our cortisol is going to go up. That changes our appetite regulation. So they are all really interconnected. The more support we have, the more well nourished, and the more we're able to rest, and the more our stress might be mitigated. But when I was doing the research for this class, which took me about 40 to 60 hours to prepare for a 3-hour course, one of the newer fields of research I came across was this idea of microchimerism or microchimerism.
Hmm.
And that is that when a woman becomes pregnant, even if she ends up losing the baby early on in pregnancy, 12 to 13 weeks, stem cells are in her body, and stem cells remain in a woman's body for 2 to 3 decades, maybe even more, after giving birth. So, what this means is that women can heal themselves with these stem cells if those 4 pillars are kind of dialed in place. If they
Hmm.
are well rested, receiving sleep, great deep nourishment, if they are able to minimize stress as much as possible and get the support they need. It turns on good epigenetics that help prevent disease for a lifetime, not only for her, but for her offspring. And that's why it's such a shame in our country, we really consider the postpartum period done at 6 weeks. And at my 6 week visit, it was a matter of getting birth control. That was really, and I did another DHQ-9, that the depression scale, but it really wasn't much more nuanced than that. It wasn't asking me about any of those 4 pillars of health. But again, I feel like it's such a missed opportunity knowing this information that, again, if we are able to help bolster a family's health in those new stages, for a few years, ideally, we can, the amount of disease mitigated is tremendous. We can really foster a lifelong time of wellness if we nail the postpartum period.
So let's think about this for a second, Mandy, because obviously to be able to get great sleep, have no stress, all these things when you're in postpartum is pretty difficult, near to impossible, at least for a lot of people, because you're caring for a brand new baby and you've never done that before, right?
Right.
Um, so, thinking about those pillars, what
Right.
are the things that we most likely can control?
That's a great question. Sleep is a gamble. You don't know what kind of, baby you're going to get and what the sleep patterns and rhythms are. But so I will say, yeah, sleep is going to be a question mark and it is going to be impacted probably for years. That was my experience. But can you lean into rest more? Our culture in this country, at least in the United States, I keep saying this country, but I realize you're in France, but I'm this country, the United States, we don't really encourage rest. We see, in fact, we see getting back to one's quote unquote normal life as a good thing, and we kind of celebrate it and applaud it, and we don't really lean into being. We're much more of a doing culture. So just leaning into moments of rest. They always say when your baby's napping, not trying to get a million things done. How can that be possible? Getting support, trying to really dial in support at least for those first 4 weeks. Is that designating a different family or community member for one day of the week? My mother-in-law is going to come help me Mondays and my best friend's going to come help me Tuesdays just for the first 4 weeks, to help me do a little bit of laundry, tidying, so that I can really lean into my rest periods during the daytime and don't feel I have to be doing all those other things. If you have the financial means, can you hire a postpartum doula? Or if you don't, can you find a postpartum doula in training who is looking for hours? Um,
I like that.
there's a lot of creative solutions, and hopefully that'll be something supported by medical insurance. Again, with just huge healthcare savings down the road, if we invest in these years, days, weeks, months, years of healing. And then again, for the nourishment part, I mean, that can come from support from your community. But if you look at your pregnancy as really a time to prepare, and you have the money, space, time, energy to do that, think about just trying to chip away at one big recipe a weekend. Making one big soup, investing in some kind of containers, maybe a chest freezer if you have the space. Craigslist always has them, or the buy nothing groups. Trying to just prepare yourself with nourishment, making one big recipe maybe for the last 4 weeks of pregnancy, and then you're at least set up for the first month.
So
I
food.
think, yeah, with
Prepping
food,
food ahead of time is one thing you really can control. You can
yes.
put in the time and effort. And or, I've seen I've had friends email out a month or two ahead of having a baby and saying, "Friends, this is where we need support most. So
Mhm.
if you want to somehow cook some food that we can freeze, that is the greatest gift." So again, ask
Absolutely.
for support so you can get nourishment, because that is one thing you can control, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of a newer way of thinking. That's actually an older way of thinking. I think in our kind of more modern day society, the last few decades, the focus has really been about baby showers and stuff that you'll need postpartum. But I love that you've had friends do that. That I think that's much more helpful in the end. Now, at least in certain urban environments, so many things are available secondhand or free. People are eager to kind of give away their stuff when they've moved on to the next stage. But what we really need is the nourishment and the support. And that's something what I try to dial in with clients during the postpartum or the pregnancy baby blessing cooking parties. Is we sit down at the table and enjoy a meal after the cooking, and we kind of go through and we talk about how can we bolster them and support them postpartum. And some ideas, like I can store the food, but another idea is we can designate, if it's soup and we have frozen containers, one person can take 6 containers and freeze them. One person can take 6 containers and freeze them. And then that can be their Monday person, and they can deliver 2 frozen soups one Monday and then two the next. And that can be a way of building in nourishment and support at the same time.
So that's wonderful. And they're very lucky to work with you. For someone who is listening to this podcast and they're like, you know what? I'm just going to DoorDash all the time, every day. What is your thought on that?
I would say if you have the money to do that, maybe invest in a food service that is more specific for postpartum healing foods that are going to be deeply nourishing. The issue with, and there are a number that exist now in a lot of urban environments, at least. The issue with a lot of prepared food at restaurants is they don't use the most quality ingredients. There's a lot of industrial seed oils being used, like canola oil, vegetable oil, instead of real nourishing fats, like olive oil, real butter, ghee. So those tend to be much more inflammatory. And we really want to dial in anti-inflammatory foods and habits postpartum. So if you do have the money to DoorDash every day, I would encourage you to try to invest in a meal service instead that does focus on nourishing foods. But I'm a fan of these cooking parties, but in general, my own life, I have been a huge proponent of bulk cooking for the last 12 to 15 years, even before having a family, and it has saved my life. I think if we are expecting folks to eat whole real foods, breakfast, lunch, and dinner 7 days a week, that's just not going to be achievable, and we're not setting people up for success. And that's when you go to get takeout or reach for the box of crackers or chips or whatever is easy and accessible. So what I've kind of dedicated, and again, I think we all have to dial in what our own individual priorities are. And I'm not saying this should be everyone's priority, but for myself, I've really identified health and longevity as a priority. And I know part of the piece of that puzzle for me is eating nourishing foods most of the time. And I try to dedicate 2 hours every weekend to preparing breakfast and lunches, and then some components of dinner to just make things easier. So that when I'm in a pinch, my lunch is ready in 2 minutes, and the healthy choice is the easy choice.
That is so powerful. That's something that honestly I haven't done enough in my life in general is food prep. And, I like to cook. So at night I'll cook, maybe I'll have leftovers. But those days that I don't have those leftovers, or I'm, in a meeting late or whatnot, it's insane how lost I feel if I don't have that food prepped. What
Right,
am I going to eat for lunch? Okay, now I have
right,
to go source it. I have to go out to a cafe. I have to call it. I have to, I
right,
have to decide. I have to look online. I have to have it delivered, whatever it might be. And if you can just prep and you have a few things that you really like,
right.
then it's 10 times easier than door dashing, and you feel a
Yes,
lot better, and you have way more
right.
energy and you get way more done that day.
Yes. And you save money in the end when you're not going out to eat. Um,
That is
and you're choosing what ingredients you're putting in your body. And I just find myself, I'm so much more satisfied because it's a balanced meal. I mean, we prioritize this so much. It rarely happens where we don't get this done, even when we have a travel or something. But the days we don't have it done, I find myself just never satisfied, and I'm always picking at things. But when I eat my proper, and when I mean proper, I mean kind of like balanced meal that has all the different components. It's a lot of volume. It's very satisfying. It feels deeply nourishing. I'm satisfied and I'm done, and I'm okay until dinner. But it's really remarkable. I love doing those self experiments when I don't have that. I'm like, wow, I'm grateful I've had that dialed in because it does make an impact in my satisfaction.
I couldn't agree more. It can help twist your mind a little bit so that you're not, you can focus on what you're focusing on instead of going to get your gum or the
Right.
snack or whatever, because your body is craving more nutrients. It's not
Hmm.
okay.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes such a difference.
And just the
Um,
plug, I become so utilitarian about cooking. I get variety through the seasons. I mostly shop at my local farmers market, but I really prepare the same things. I make these chia jars for breakfast that have chia, silka oat, coconut, hemp seed, cinnamon. I prepare 20 in about 5 minutes. I pour in boiling hot water. Once those are cool, I cap them, I keep them in the fridge, and then morning of, I top them with a large portion of frozen blueberries and eat it with spoonfuls of peanut butter. And I crave that. I tell people I never deprive myself. It's very delicious. And then for lunch, make two big vegetable-based frittatas in a cast iron pan with between the two 6 or 8 yellow, white, or purple onions, 2 pounds of shiitake mushrooms, and 3 to 4 bunches of kale, cheese, pasture-raised eggs, and good healthy fats. I usually do a combination of olive oil, avocado oil, and butter, salt, and I eat a slice or two of that depending on how hungry I am, and then I'll roast some kind of vegetable on the side. But I would never eat that many vegetables at lunch if it weren't for that. Or sometimes I'll cook a big pot of beans in the pressure cooker and eat a scoop of beans. Sometimes I'll try to get fermented foods like sour cream on top, but it's very, very satisfying. And then, and then we'll prepare some components for dinner on the weekend as well. So that, and we'll usually try to cook a lot of food on Monday night for Tuesday night, a lot of food on Wednesday night for Thursday night, and then we kind of wing the weekend nights. But it's a great system, and you don't have to overcomplicate things. I think that's kind of tricky in today's modern society when we have millions of recipes at our fingertips. It can feel overwhelming, and you can just find a few things that you enjoy. Maybe it doesn't have to be frittatas every day, but it could be other modular dishes like a green-based, like a quinoa with a bunch of different roasted vegetables and avocado, or a fried rice dish with a bunch of vegetables and pastured eggs. It doesn't have to be complicated, but just find something that works, that you love, you genuinely enjoy, and that's pretty easy to knock out in an hour or two.
Exactly. You don't have to be a big cook to
No.
feed yourself
Right.
well. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be your passion. It doesn't have to be what you spend all your time on. It can be very simple. And that's okay. Especially if you're getting like quality ingredients, right?
Yeah.
A delicious tomato with a dollop of ricotta on top. You're already getting protein and fiber, and you have a great snack, and that's as
Right.
simple as can be. If they're quality, they're going to be great. So that makes a big difference.
Definitely.
Although it sounds like I might need to get a recipe or two of yours onto our Julienne program,
Yes.
because those sound amazing. And you obviously know what you're doing.
Yeah. No, I kind of between breakfast and lunch, it covers a lot of your needs. So, or what I've designed in. So it really works.
I love it. So, Mandy, I'm going to shift it a little bit here. With all of this, you're going through so many, useful strategies that we can use during the perinatal journey, which is incredible. One question that comes up often is just, how do I know that this is really going to make a difference? How do I know how effective, nutrition changes and paying attention to nutrition will actually be in my life? And so I'm curious, you've been part of quite a few studies. I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious if you might want to dig into any of those a little bit. I know there were quite a few we talked about: Moms 2.0, Fee Fi Fo, Diet
Right.
Fits, whatever you think is most helpful to talk about. Just kind of showing what you've learned from these studies and how paying attention to your eating choices can make quite a difference.
Yeah. I will say on all these things, a big takeaway is changing habits is hard, especially in adults with decades of eating a certain way or doing a certain thing. But change is possible, and I think a big motivator for folks in a research study can feel like that's a time right for change, and we see some good results in changing people's eating habits during a finite period of time with a lot of support from a health educator. Um, I will say also that's something to go back to the perinatal period I'm so passionate about, because that's a really unique time in someone's life when people are so willing to change. And again, a missed opportunity in most societies. But there's not a lot of changes, not a lot of time frames in an adult's life where they are really willing to change. But I think In all my research studies that I participate in, I think that I keep coming back to that this shouldn't be a science. It shouldn't be a science, nutrition. You can really find whatever you want to find in the research to prove your point. That veganism will prolong your life, that paleo will prolong your life, that this diet will reduce your anti-inflammatory or your inflammation markers. But I think we really need to hone in on getting back to the basics and helping people support gentle habits that are sustainable and not looking for the next silver bullet solution. But I really think, I mean, what I hone in is whole real foods, most of the time. How to make that possible, bulk cooking is a great option. And then just having a lot of things at hand that will help support you when you are in a pinch, maybe keeping hard-boiled eggs on hand, tinned fish, something, avocados, something that when you're in a pinch to still make whole foods the easy choice. We need to get people back on just a balanced eating plan. If you're not eating all the components of a balanced meal, you're going to have cravings, you're going to have fluctuations in blood sugar. But if you really are able to make most of your meals half vegetables, some amount of protein, some amount of starch, some amount of healthy fat, it's not rocket science, but it really makes a difference in your satisfaction, and figuring out which component of those really helps you feel personally satisfied. Do you need more healthy fats? Do you need more vegetables volume to make you feel full? Another component we really talk about in research is, or in the studies I've been a part of, is tuning into mindful eating when you're gently hungry, not waiting till you're starving, and trying to stop when you're satisfied. And identifying when you feel hunger, is that because I just had a stressful call with my boss, or, tuning into why we feel hungry and how we can satisfy that with other things that will help. And oftentimes food is just the first mechanism that we are accustomed to kind of satisfy any stressful moments. And then eating every 3 to 4 hours, and not waiting, getting good quality rest. But we don't have studies that just look at those basic things because they feel so basic. But every single research study I've ever been a part of, when I have the opportunity to be with folks for a long time, usually it's 6 months to a year, we really try to drill down on those basic tenets of nourishment and more broadly holistic health, gentle movement. But so I think I feel a little conflicted, but I feel like it is not rocket science. It's really getting back to the basics and things we all internally know already, but it's just how can we build our lives to make these health promoting things an easier lift with all of our millions of competing priorities today. But yeah, I will say in our microbiome research, a lot of some interesting preliminary findings. So microbiome, referring to the large intestine, gut flora, we can nourish it in a number of ways. And in some of our studies, we try to manipulate it by randomizing folks into a high fiber arm, meaning they eat a lot of plants, high fermented or probiotic rich arm, or both, where they eat high fiber and fermented foods, or control groups. What we found is when folks go to eating just fermented foods and they don't have a high baseline of eating fiber, it actually can increase the markers for inflammation, which is really interesting. And one lovely analogy I often try to teach toward is, if we think of our large intestine or microbiome as a lawn, we can think of fiber-rich foods, which fiber is found in all plants, anything that comes from the ground. So vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, beans, legumes, and certain other foods like coconut, dark chocolate, popcorn. If we think about our large intestine as a lawn or earth, we want to think about fiber as making rich soil. And fermented foods are more like a fertilizer. They help with the proliferation and growth of species. But if we just think about a lawn, we would never want to pour fertilizer onto a dead lawn. It would burn it, right? It would burn the soil. So we really, when you're trying to start manipulating your gut health and making for a healthier microbiome, you always want to start with a base of high fiber foods. So incorporating chia, green peas, a smattering of vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, beans, and then after slowly adding in fermented foods. So we have, again, this is an ancient tradition, but now we have more and more available. But apple cider vinegar, all of our fermented dairy products, if they're truly fermented, we have cultured butter, kefir, yogurt, cottage cheese, sour cream, kombucha, miso, so many different fermented cabbage
Pickles.
products. What was that?
Yeah. Pickles.
Pickles, exactly. Real lacto fermented pickles. So incorporating small bits of that after fiber.
So what would that be for the lawn? If you've got your fertilizer from the fiber, what would be your
So the fiber is actually helping create healthy soil, and
Got it.
then the to grow your grass or your vegetables or your garden, and then the probiotic or fermented foods are like a fertilizer. So that will help spread,
our large intestine?
grow new species of bacteria and help them grow in size. So it'll help with the diversity of your microbiome and help grow them in numbers. But you don't want to just start. I think a lot of times when I hear about people now trying to recover from antibiotics, it's like, oh, I just need to take probiotics. But really, it needs to be both. And then there's a third, less talked about way that we can manipulate our microbiome, which is through the use of resistant starch, which is less known. But resistant starch is formed when you cook and cool a starch. So like potatoes, when you boil them or roast them and then completely cool them, or pasta or rice. It's interesting when I've taught people about this who are living with type 2 diabetes and they love rice, they try this, they completely cool the rice. Even if you reheat it, it forms a different type of resistant starch, but it can be much easier for your body to tolerate. And it can be just great food for your gut to feed on. So it's like maybe there was some cultural wisdom in potato salads, and which is interesting.
I have never heard that. That is fascinating to me. So that can make a difference on your blood sugar levels for
Yes.
something that would normally spike them
Yes.
is cooking it, cooling it completely,
Completely.
and eating it or reheating it and eating it.
Exactly. So that's another plug for bulk cooking, because if you cook any of your starch ahead of time, like even as simple as baking a tray of potatoes and then you completely cool them, you reheat them with your slice of frittata, and you eat it with a dollop of sour cream or some kimchi, you've got all your components that will be food for your gut. And I
So that must
think,
be also sorry.
oh, go
That
ahead.
must be the same with like a good quality sourdough bread or something.
Yes.
You don't
And so
together.
great point, Anja. Sourdough bread is cooked and baked, so it doesn't have any probiotics in it, living probiotics. But thank you for plugging that, because fermented foods in general, even if they are baked and don't have the living probiotic, it can still be much more digestible, and all the nutrition is much more available for us to digest
Because it's been cooked.
because it's been fermented. So
Fermented.
with sourdough bread, the wheat is fermented with the sourdough starter, and that makes less anti-nutrients, things that inhibit the absorption of certain. So if it's like a whole grain sourdough, we can't always absorb the nutrients that are in the bread. But if it's a sourdough ferment, that helps make those nutrients more available for our body to digest. And
Wait,
then
what did you mean by that exactly? That didn't make sense. So
certain foods have anti-nutrients
Mhm.
like beans, grains, that our bodies, even though they contain certain B vitamins, the foods contain certain B vitamins, we can't digest them or absorb them.
Okay.
So when they are processed in such a way, cooked properly, fermented, we can absorb a lot more of the nutrition. Same with dairy. Fermented dairy, calcium is much more bioavailable in fermented dairy, like yogurt, kefir, cottage cheese, sour cream. And people who experience lactose intolerance might be okay consuming fermented dairy products. And again, they are much more nutrient rich because a lot of those nutrients have been processed through the process of lacto or fermentation to become more bioavailable.
That is, I 100% relate to that because and this is something I've known for a long time, but if I have milk or cream,
Mm-hmm.
I not only feel like I could puke it up, I don't feel like my body's digesting anything, but I
Uh-huh.
get extremely constipated. TMI,
Uh-huh.
but it's true. But I can eat yogurt every single day. I can eat cheese every single
Mm-hmm.
day, and I find no issues.
Yeah.
So perfect example.
Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
Um,
Wow.
but yeah, I think just to sum up research, I think I wish because I think a lot of nutrition research gets caught up in no, this way of eating is right, no, this way of eating is right. I think we can all agree that whole real foods will be health promoting. And how can we work as a society to make that more of a reality? And to just form simple habits that will keep us healthy for a lifetime, I think should be the focus instead of getting caught in the weeds. I think we know the answers, but the hard part is how do we get people to do this with all of our busy lives and competing priorities and financial stress? I think that's where we should focus our money and research on. I think maybe I think we've determined, we have X number of nutrients and vitamins and minerals, but maybe we're only scratching the surface. We probably know such a fraction of what actually exists in food. I don't know. But I just think instead we really need to focus on like, okay, we all can agree vegetables are health promoting. How do we get more people to do that? How do we get more people to cook and come together over food, rebuild community, reclaim that connection with food that's been such a vital part of human history. And I think another aspect of research I'm really excited about is the microbiome. I think we've done so much damage to our microbiome before we really knew anything. The introduction of antibiotics in the 1930s into our animal feed. And then, and they have been life saving, absolutely, but how to use them more judiciously, the introduction of cesarean births, the introduction of formula. We just have a lot of insults on our microbiome that haven't existed for many human generations, and how to reclaim that. And I think that is what really excites me. It's so fascinating when you start looking at different diseases, Parkinson's disease, schizophrenia, they have very similar microbiome makeups. And
Huh.
I think this is a missing piece of autism. I think this is going to be, I think we could really focus there. And how is the microbiome supported? Through healthy habits. It's not just this diet versus this diet. It's really how to reframe thinking about a lifestyle that feels attainable for people in our human population.
Which, is tricky with our supply of food today, right? If you're shopping at your typical Trader Joe's and Costco and getting the pre-made meals, your microbiome is probably suffering. So somehow getting the whole food and cooking that yourself can make a massive difference, right?
Right. Absolutely. And yeah, and again, and the microbiome is supported by stress mitigation and sleep and rest, and feeling feeling the sense of support is going to help our well-being and our stress. And so really looking more holistically. But yeah, just again, yeah, how to make those whole real foods easier and more attainable, cheaper, tastier. I think we could spend a lot more government money on that. Subsidizing vegetable farmers and real um, farmers who are able to produce meat and raise animals in a sustainable way. I would love to see more farm subsidies going there versus corn and soy.
Yeah, which we've seen too much of, and that has a lot to do with what's been marketed over the last 50 years and what we were able to produce bulk of, right? And
Right.
that led it to being in our diet in every way, shape, and form.
Yes.
I think this is wonderful to hear. I'm curious, Mandy, just to wrap this up. I'm curious, for someone again that's going through the perinatal phase, um, or perhaps actually to switch this a little bit, perhaps for a doctor such as an OBGYN or a reproductive endocrinologist or someone in that field who very much wishes they had more information on the nutritious aspect of this, but they don't have time or the education in their practice. What do you think would be good for someone like that to take away? Because we'll definitely be having people like that listening. What do you think would be helpful for them to have and offer in their practice?
I think time is so condensed. So again, I have a lot of compassion for them in the short visits that they're allowed with their patients. But try to ask questions, maybe something that gets at each of those four pillars if time allows. What are you eating? How are you nourishing yourself? How is your sleep? What's your support system look like? And how is your stress? And that might be too much. But if you're able to ask those four simple questions, maybe in an intake, can you bolster your team with someone that can really dive deeper? Can you hire a dietitian or a health coach or physical therapist? What can you do to bolster your team given limited time to help really look at the holistic person during their journey?
I love it. And probably just even the resources that they're giving out, right? I think a lot
Yeah,
of them
can be
are
helpful.
outdated.
Yeah, direct them to well funded or well researched websites, podcasts, books. Um, so that would be, yeah, a great place to, yeah, resources. Absolutely.
Which is what we're offering at Julienne. So there's my plug for you there.
Yes.
Is the resources for them to offer. But very good point. Um, Through all of this, it's been magical and enlightening to chat through it. Do you have any final takeaways, any final pieces of advice for someone listening, going through, the the world of life and health, especially through the perinatal journey? Do you have anything for them
I
that you
think
haven't
the,
said already?
yeah, leaning into those four pillars again, but especially setting up your support system, because that can help you again optimize rest, opportunities to lean into rest, help you feel less stress, and help you remain nourished throughout the period. And I don't think a lot of times our modern day societies, we live family farther from family than we ever have. We might be in a different phase of life than our local friends, but really trying to figure out how you can find support during this time of life that your life will be forever changed. It's a really transformative time, and being able to find support um, can be transformative.
Beautifully put. I love that. We will have to carry that with us, those of you listening. Um, Thank you so much, Mandy. So, for anyone who might want to work with you or find you, connect with you in some way, what do you offer and where are you located?
I am located in San Francisco Bay Area of California, and my website is nourishnewlife.com. And I offer postpartum support, which can look like tackling any of those four pillars of health, nutrition counseling throughout the life cycle. So, everything from preconception to postpartum, infant feeding, and beyond, as well as the baby blessing cooking parties.
Beautiful. Love that. All right. So we will link that in our show notes. But that's very helpful. And I highly recommend working with Mandy, reaching out to Mandy however you can. If you get lucky enough to work with her, then you should pinch yourself because I sure am right now. But thank you so, so, so much, Mandy, for
Thank
coming
you,
on and
Anja.
chatting with me today.
Thanks.
It's been such a joy. All
Likewise.
right. Well, with that, have a wonderful day. And thanks for listening in and being curious about food as fuel for happiness, healing, and health. And we'll see you again soon.